Ben, what did you think of Tim Scott?
Look, I think they were smart to put Tim Scott up there. He's sort of, the Biden of his party in that he comes across warm, authentic. He tells the stories, that kind of stuff. The problem isn't the messenger. The messenger was great, but the message was nonsense. Somehow we forgot to notice that Biden is dividing the country. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. He acts like all the division in the country, that's what he wants to talk about, is coming from one side. That doesn't make any sense. But he lost a lot of African Americans by the tens of millions when he said, America is not a racist nation. Look, you can say that we're getting better. You can say that we've come a long way. But when you look at these numbers, when you look at these statistics, it is very clear that this country is still struggling with racism. We still have racism showing up in almost every institution. So I thought he did himself a disservice by jumping, that shark unnecessarily. That said, there's a reason they put him up. He's the best they've got. He can give that message. He can talk about all. He can try to polish up all of the Republican nonsense without the sharp edges, better than the rest of them. What's amazing to me is how different he sounds from all the other Republicans.
Right.
And so, again, it's almost a tell that the rest of the party is in such bad shape that you've got to put him up there.
Where was Donald Trump?
He did touch a lot of those really big touchstones for conservatives, flaying the experts, flaying Washington, invoking socialism. I thought he probably scored some points with a lot of people on the school issue. There are a lot of parents in this country who are frustrated that schools didn't open more quickly. But on your point, your first point, he did say at the end, original sin is not the end of our story. So he's acknowledging this history, even as he is making this proclamation that racism is not, the American. This is part of our story. And what people are saying is we need to confront it and we need to understand it. So he conflicted with himself.
What also struck me was that this was not a message that was a Donald Trump message at all. He was not speaking to the base of the party, except in one area where he was refusing to give Joe Biden any credit on COVID-19. He said the tide had already turned on COVID-19 when Biden became president. And of course, everybody understands that Operation Warp Speed happened under Joe Biden, but getting vaccines into arms was a Biden operation.
Evan, just in terms of the difficulty the Republicans have kind of pinning Joe Biden as a socialist or whatever it may be, has he, as you see his evolution as a politician, does that surprise you, his ability to kind of be a difficult target in this case?
Well, you know what struck me about it, actually? There was a through line here. If you go back and you look at one of the Democratic response that Joe Biden gave, actually, in 1983, he talked about what he called two cornerstone American rights, fairness and opportunity. And what I heard tonight in the Joe Biden speech was a lot of talk of fairness and some talk of opportunity. What you just heard in the Tim Scott response was there's a lot of talk of opportunity, not a lot of talk of fairness. And I think in some ways it misses something that is changing in the American electorate, particularly among young people,
This is how I know you are a biographer of Joe Biden, that you went back and listened to a Biden response to a speech in 1983.
More gripping than you might.
That's good.
Busy Saturday night.
And look, one of the good things about having a Tim Scott in the mix is that he is reaching out and he is working to get something done on the policing stuff. And it does take some courage. I just want to give him his credit. He's running for re-election soon. He could get primaried if he goes, too far in a liberal direction. But so he does have the integrity to say, look, I know that policing is a problem. I personally dealt with it. I want to work on that. I think, Democrats should applaud that. I just think that some of the other things that he's trying to polish up, it's clear the Republicans are attacking voting rights. They're not passing a bunch of bills to try to make voting easier. I think it's, his genius is worthy of a better cause than trying to defend some of the stuff his party's doing.
Just in terms of what President Biden was talking about, he talked about the border, he talked about immigration and Dreamers, did not talk about, and a number of, Republicans and even, I think Mark Kelly, Democrat, has been criticizing him tonight for not talking about the issues on the border, the crisis with so many people coming across in the past few months.
Yeah, and this obviously has been the biggest problem that has cropped up in his first 100 days that continues to be a festering sore for him. And I think he hoped that the discussion of immigration reform would signify his seriousness. He did talk about assigning the vice president to try and resolve some of the issues that are leading to the crisis. So he didn't completely drive. He didn't offer a solution particularly tonight. But just getting back to his speech, I really, in some ways, I regret that he had to touch all those bases, because if it had just been about these economic issues that he is pushing, it would have been, I think, more powerful. Not that those issues, the other issues, are vitally important to people, but the essence of the speech was an economic speech. So it was a State of the Union speech attached to an economic speech.
These things always tend to be laundry lists, as you know, from being in the White House, kind of gets passed around.
Yes.
And from agency to agency.
It's awful.
It is awful. At the beginning, I think, and the end was really what Biden wanted to talk about, which was that democracy is at stake. And I think the issue I have with Scott and with Republicans right now is, yes, Biden is proposing all this spending, and he's trying to figure out a way to pay for it. But Republicans have no credibility on paying for things right now. If only they had paid for things during the last 4 years. So when they say biggest tax increase, et cetera, well, they had one. And it cost the government, $2 trillion, whatever. So where's the credibility from Republicans on talking about Biden's spending?